Outlaw Law is brought to you by Whitaker and Hamer, attorneys and counselors at law. Your law firm for life.
This week on the Outlaw Lawyer, we have attorney Taylor Scruggs-Smith joining us in studio. We're going to answer a lot of listener questions, kind of related to a domestic family law type of theme, and we're going to get into that next.
And now, Outlaw Lawyer.
Welcome into the Outlaw Lawyer. I'm Morgan Patrick, consumer advocate. I'm joined on stage, on set, Josh Whitaker, Joe Hamer, managing partners at Whitaker and Hamer. And we also have Taylor Scruggs-Smith, an attorney with Whitaker and Hamer. Whitaker and Hamer Law Firm. We've got offices in Raleigh, Garner, Clayton, Goldsboro, Fuquay-Varina, and Gastonia. And as I mentioned, the guys are managing partners at the firm, practicing attorneys here in the great state of North Carolina. If you've got a legal situation you're going through and you need answers to questions, I've got a number for you, 800-659-1186. That's 800-659-1186. Just call, leave your contact information, briefly what the call is about. An attorney with Whitaker and Hamer will be in touch. And you can always email your questions to the show. It's questions@theoutlawlawyer.com. Gentlemen, we've got a lot to get to today.
We do, Morgan. Lots of stuff to talk about today. I like to remind people, I think I need to remind people here on the Outlaw Lawyer, we're here as attorneys to answer legal questions, to talk about the law, talk about things in the news. It takes us a while to really get in the groove, though. We have to talk about some other stuff before to kind of loosen us up and get us in the mood. So we haven't sat down together since the Final Four, I don't think.
That is correct.
Right. I didn't watch the Final Four games. I think I predicted on
You
our
watched
last.
none of it?
Watched none of it. I watched none of it. I watched what's the new Marvel? I watched Moon Knight and some Bob's Burgers with the
Great
kids.
show.
Yeah. But
How was Moon Knight?
I liked it. I enjoyed it.
Okay.
It wasn't anything
It's
crazy.
one episode, right? You didn't watch the whole. It's just.
Yeah, it was just one episode. Yeah. That's what we did.
Yeah.
But you obviously, Joe, I can't imagine you were too happy with how everything turned out.
It was fine. It was no big deal. Yeah, it was just a game.
Saturday, early game, Kansas, Villanova.
Not a very entertaining game.
No, Kansas really outmanning.
Kansas won that game like in the first 10 minutes.
Very true. And then that second game,
Second game, yeah, it was a game.
pretty good ratings.
Yeah.
A lot
Oh,
of people watched.
WrestleMania was on too.
That's
I watched
right.
some WrestleMania.
Update.
Yeah. It was good.
Did Stone Cold show up?
He did. And he's older. There's only so much he can do, But they did. I thought they did.
He
good.
had a bad neck, was never supposed to wrestle again, and he did a lot, man. I was surprised.
Yeah, I couldn't do what he was doing.
Yeah, I watched that game, whatever game it was. I can't remember whoever played, and it wasn't the most exciting game, and kind of a downer for most of the world. But then I turned on WrestleMania and saw Stone Cold.
Oh, that's a
and that
nice
was
way to
real
end.
pick-me-up.
Yeah.
Still sponsored by Miller Lite, I guess? Is he still-
No, he's got his own beer now.
Yeah.
It's he has his own brewery. That's probably why he came back. He drank 16 of them during the time he was out there.
Just taking a bath in it, though. He wasn't. Yeah.
So, but it was a lot of nostalgia, man. A lot of nostalgia for me. I was a young boy during his heyday.
So, Joe, tell us why you turned away from the basketball game.
No, I watched the whole game. I saw it, and you can look at it a couple of ways. You can look at Carolina's season and you can say, well, they had double-digit losses. They won nothing of consequence, no championships. And you can say they didn't win really anything. No, again, there's no hard work coming home with them. And so you can say, well, they'll never be remembered as a team in history. But the other perspective is they will always be the team that has the largest choke job in national championship history. And for that, they'll always be on the record books. And no one's going to forget that team for the failure that they were. So,
That's
it's either way.
I think it's a hot take.
I think if we take the season for what it is, it's not how you start, it's how you finish.
Okay, that's a good point. But if
we did finish second.
Yes, if you're not first, you're last.
And I did say we, because if you guys noticed in any of the footage, I'm right there on the bench.
Yeah, I saw it.
I went in late in the game.
I think if you're a Duke or Carolina fan, you take the two teams' records and their seasons, you take their names off of it. So you got a 29-10 team that wins nothing really. They go to the national championship game, that's a thing, but they lose it. And then you have a 32-17 that wins the regular season conference championship. Which team are you going to take, man? Take everything out of the equation. You just look strictly at that.
I faded out for a minute.
Okay, that's fine. But
Took a nap.
Well, I'm a State fan, so I don't have a.
no, I'll say though it was if Carolina wins the championship, which it looked very probable, like they would have. Like honestly, you kind of if you watch that game, which you didn't, but by halftime you were like, this is a done deal. It's over with. Carolina wins that championship, it hurts a lot more than it does them not.
So you're
winning,
okay.
so.
You're okay.
Yeah, it was like that evening. And
Life
then,
can go on. You're okay.
that evening, and then probably like 6 hours of the next day. I was a little like, this isn't the best thing that's ever happened. But I'll never watch the game back again. I'll never watch any second of it. You kind of disconnect from social media.
Well, they are calling the Duke-Carolina game in the Final Four one of the better Final Four games that they've seen.
Yeah,
It was
and
fun.
again,
Back and forth,
even,
18 lead changes. I mean, you can't really argue with that.
and even like Carolina fans I know, no one enjoyed that game that's a true fan of either team. Until the very end.
no.
Just like I said, no one
Agony.
enjoyed it. Yeah,
Agony.
it was completely stressful.
Yeah.
So you don't even appreciate, like you don't even remember the ebbs and flows of the game because you're so consumed in it. So I have no idea if it was a great game. I just thought it sucked the whole time watching it. It sucked to the bitter end. So.
And so one of our attorneys over at Whitaker Hamer, Taylor Scruggs-Smith, is with us today. I take it you didn't watch the Final Four, Taylor?
I did not. I have never been into really college sports like that. I am originally from the Maryland, D.C. metro area. I care.
You got a pro slant up there.
Yes.
Yeah.
I care more about NBA, which is why I'm very sad right now that Lakers are completely out of the playoffs. I can't remember the last time LeBron wasn't in the playoffs.
So are you a Lakers fan or?
No, I just like LeBron. I am a Miami Heat fan.
The
And Miami Heat is deep in.
Yeah, they're in. Okay.
So I'm good right now.
So a couple of actual. We get so caught up in sports when we get started to get the juices flowing. Sure. The proverbial juices flowing.
We woke Joe up. That's good.
Right. That's right.
I was awake from the start, man. I'm ready.
So
ready.
we've talked about it for a week or two, but Ketanji Brown Jackson, Supreme Court nominee, has performed very well in her Senate confirmation hearings. Hard to find anything negative to say about her. I know some folks have tried, but nothing that I don't think we already have kind of talked about. But I know a couple of Republican senators came out saying, "Hey,
They're going to vote for
we're going to
her.
vote for confirmation." So in a 50-50 Senate, that kind of tells you we're probably headed towards confirmation. So I think that's a good story all around. You know, we talked about her qualifications before here on the show. We had a panel. I think everybody agreed, you know, no matter what side you sit on, you know it's going to be a Democratic nominee. So if you're a Republican, you're still getting a Democratic nominee, but I think all things considered, they've done a pretty good job.
I would agree. And I think that makes that, assuming, and it does look likely that confirmation does occur, it's another mark on our book of perfect predictions.
Right.
You know, the thing that's really important here.
It's nice to have a confirmation hearing that's not super contentious. You know, it seems like the past couple have been really
True.
Anyway, so that's that is a legal thing that's happened that we've talked about. I just wanted to keep everybody updated. And then I think it was just yesterday. So we've talked about how there's a couple of abortion cases up before the Supreme Court. Supreme Court has heard oral arguments on a couple. We haven't had a decision come down yet from the Supreme Court. And so in the absence of guidance, a lot of states who are more anti-abortion, more pro-life, you've seen a lot of legislation from these states really cutting down when an abortion, when someone can get an abortion, who can perform an abortion. And Oklahoma kind of went further than everybody yesterday and pretty much just a straight out ban.
Legal. Yeah. They pretty much came out and said they put criminal attached to criminal consequences. So it's going to be a 10-year fine. I mean, a 10-year sentence and then a $100,000 fine. And
that's for anybody performing, right?
And that's for anybody performing. And the only exception they're making to that is to save the life of the mother. So that's the most kind of blatant anti-abortion law we've seen in a very long time.
And so we've talked about these laws right now. The law of the land, the federal law is Roe v. Wade, and we've spent a whole show on Roe v. Wade. But Roe v. Wade, you know, found abortion to be an implied constitutional right, kind of set up some time safeguards, and that's still the law of the land. That has not been. You hear a lot about it in the news. It has not been reversed. That's still the way it is. The Supreme Court may be limiting it. We may see that come up, but for right now, states like Oklahoma are really just going out there.
Almost to the wall, man.
Above and beyond the Call of Duty, as some may say. But they're
I read this one doesn't take effect till I think 90 days after the state legislature adjourns. But that is the most aggressive anti-abortion state legislation that we've seen so far.
And I think it passed the House with no debate. So that was one of the other big things that was coming out with how fast it got passed, because there was no debate about it. They just passed it and voted on it.
That seems nuts.
Yeah.
No debate?
No debate.
Yeah, and I don't know much. I just saw like the story like late last night, so I haven't read about if there was anything that got skipped or it was just that had that much support in that state.
I think the census from some of the articles that I've been reading, because this literally just happened like maybe 16 hours ago, was that this really happened so fast because there was already so much support.
Yeah.
So they had no debate. As soon as it hit the floor, they voted, and it got passed. And I believe the governor's already come out and said that he'll sign any anti-abortion law. So we're expecting that this is going to become a law and probably likely to get challenged.
I think it's a guaranteed
challenge.
I mean, they got it queued up.
That's a lock.
Waiting. Yes.
They have it
Stone
queued
cold
up.
lock.
They're waiting for the first person in line.
Yeah.
Well, soon, and it may, in a couple of weeks, I would expect that we're going to finally hear from the Supreme Court. We're finally going to get an opinion on the two cases they have before them, and that will really, this stuff will either be wildly illegal or it'll fit under the new, of course, this Oklahoma one's not going to fit under anything. It's either, right, they have to completely overturn Roe v. Wade. But anyway, so today, most of our show we're dedicating again to listener questions. We didn't do a listener question show for a long time. We had an abundance of listener questions built up. So that is what we're going to tackle today.
All right, the Outlaw Lawyers, Josh Whitaker and Joe Hamer. You can find them at Whitaker and Hamer Law Firm, the managing partners there. And again, practicing attorneys here in North Carolina. Our special guest is Taylor Scruggs-Smith, also an attorney with Whitaker and Hamer. If you've got a legal situation you're going through and you've got questions, well, we've got a number for you, and you can call it. 800-659-1186. That's 800-659-1186. Leave your contact information, briefly what the call's about, and an attorney with Whitaker and Hamer will be in touch. And you can always email the show, and we'll use them on future programs, just like we are today. Questions at theoutlawlawyer.com. When we come back, we'll get into divorce in the state of North Carolina.
When you're closing on your dream home, you need attorneys you can trust. Real estate closings are so much more than signing documents and handing off the keys. The process includes title searches, review surveys, funding transactions, and so much more. The law firm of Whitaker and Hamer has a dedicated team with decades of legal experience in real estate. They can make getting you into your dream home a little bit easier. Their team has closed tens of thousands of real estate transactions in North Carolina. It's important to have a real estate law team that will have your back every step of the way. Call 800-659-1186. Again, that's 800-659-1186. Or visit their website, wh.lawyer, to set up your closing with their team.
Welcome back into the Outlaw Lawyer. Morgan Patrick, consumer advocate. I'm joined by Josh Whitaker and Joe Hamer, managing partners at Whitaker and Hamer and practicing attorneys here in North Carolina. Our special guest is Taylor Scruggs-Smith, also an attorney at Whitaker and Hamer. We're about to get into divorce and the state of North Carolina. Before I do that, let's do this. There's a phone number you can call if you've got a legal situation you're facing and you need some answers to your questions. 800-659-1186. That's 800-659-1186. Leave your contact information, briefly what the call's about, and an attorney with Whitaker and Hamer will be in touch. And as always, you can always email the program, questions at theoutlawlawyer.com. We'll use them on future programs, and we're going to get to some of those questions here a little bit later. Guys?
Morgan, one of the things we like to do on the show is we like to engage with our listeners. We get a lot of calls to the hotline. We also have an email address. A lot of people will send us in things. And so our first question today, we really haven't tackled. Me and Joe don't live in the family law, domestic law world from day to day. Taylor does, and that's one of the reasons Taylor's visiting us with us today, so we can handle some of these family law listener questions that have been building up here. So the first one, and again, I kind of take a couple of questions and put them together and kind of formulate one that we can talk about on air. But the first one's pretty basic, and we get it a lot. Basically, our listener here says, I want a divorce. what are the bare bones requirements that I have to meet to get a divorce in North Carolina? So here, our listener is married, has been married, has made that painful decision that it's just time to get a divorce. That's what I want to do, and that's a call we get a lot at the firm. And so Taylor, when you sit down with someone who has kind of made that decision, we'll say our listener here is married, living with their spouse. We're going to give them some kids.
Give them 3 kids.
3 kids.
Yep. 2 boys, a girl.
They live together. They're in the same house. The house, it's titled to both of them. And so we're just going to try to make this the most normal, average divorce situation that we see. So when this listener comes in and says, you know what, can't do it anymore, we'll just make it a super nice situation. It's a mutual decision. They both have decided,
Right.
Hey, this ain't working out. What can we do is best for the kids? So we got that person coming in. What's their first step once they've made that decision?
First step is a step that nobody likes. You actually have to separate.
Yeah.
North Carolina is very particular about that. The statute says that you have to remain separate and apart for a continuous year. So you can't even file for a divorce until you've been separated for a year. And separated does not mean living in the same house and just staying on separate sides of the house. We get a lot of calls about that too. Can't do that. You guys have to actually be living in separate households, paying bills separately, getting mail at separate places, truly saying that you're not together anymore.
This is a good time to remind everybody that we're all licensed to practice in North Carolina. And so when we talk about these things, we're talking about North Carolina law. In my mind, our listener is a North Carolina citizen subject to the laws of North Carolina. And so North Carolina, there's no quickie divorce. So obviously this is a big emotional decision that you have to come to, but it's also going to be a financial decision, a lifestyle decision. A lot is going to have to change. And
the big thing is too, North Carolina is a no fault based divorce. So that's the other reason you have to wait for that whole year, because the only grounds to get divorced is that term of separation. So you can't say, oh, he cheated or somebody else cheated and I want a divorce.
Yeah.
Like
You still have to wait.
You still have to wait.
and
That's not to say, and this gets into a more complicated area of discussion, but that's not to say that fault is irrelevant.
Right. It's
in
never
the process
relevant.
of the divorce.
But
you're just saying fault is irrelevant insofar as the question of can I get divorced?
Right. Like, obviously, anything that happened during the marriage can come up in terms of other areas, but whether or not you can actually go to the court and say, divorce me, the fault doesn't matter.
Right. So I think that's the biggest hurdle for people, and I always just thought, I don't know this to be true, but I always just assumed that was part of the statute to discourage divorce or to make people think it over. I don't know that to be the case, but in my mind, that's kind of always how I
think it is to discourage marriage, but I think it's also to spend that year to handle all issues, to encourage mutual agreement to figure out these issues without court time.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Because a lot of people sometimes don't even really know whether or not they want to stay separated. And part of the statute says you have to separate with the intent that it's permanent.
Right.
So if you guys 3 months from after you separate, start going to marriage counseling, tell everybody you're married again, and then you move back into the home, you guys start that whole year over again.
You're resetting that clock.
You're resetting that clock. So I think North Carolina appreciates the sanctity and the sense of marriage, and they really want people to really think things through. And if you're going to fully go through with it, go ahead and start figuring out some of these long-term issues like child custody and the money, and not have to make it so contentious in a courtroom.
Yeah, I think the statute and then just general practice of how it plays out, the state really encourages that amicable mutual resolution any way possible, because again, it uses resources. The contentious process, it's not good for anybody. So
Especially for kids.
especially for kids.
And we'll talk more about that. We got another listener question coming up here in a minute we'll talk more about some of those items. But for now, basically, you have to be separated, permanently separated for at least a year, living in different places. And of course, a lot of households, that's a
real financial
right.
consideration.
A lot of times if you're in a divorce situation, a lot of the ones that we see, there's some financial distress usually in there. Maybe one spouse is not good with money. There's usually financial concerns that have led up to this decision. And on top of that, now you're going to have to find a way to kind of have two households.
Right.
Right.
And if kids are involved, like you said, until something's written down and agreed upon, you got to figure a way to transport the kids back and forth to make sure everybody's seeing the kids. So there's a lot of things that go into it. And I would like to add in that what we actually tell people, even though the statute says a year, we like to tell people when they're in doing consults, it's a year and a day. Because you can't file on day 365.
Right.
You got to file on day 366.
I got you. That makes sense.
That one day, crucial.
That one day is so crucial. A judge will knock out the entire case if it's too close.
And then there's things in the, well, I guess we got another listener question I keep hinting to, but we've got another one coming up, so we'll talk about that there. So you've done it. You've separated from your spouse. You guys have worked out the issues you need to work out during the separation period. And you're at day 366, and who files?
Either party.
Either party can
So
file.
it doesn't matter who files. The main requirement is that at least one party has to still be in North Carolina. So done a divorce before where husband was actually the one filing, but he lived in Georgia, wife still lived here. So as long as one party is still in North Carolina, you can file.
Right.
And it's like a complaint, some basic documents to get started off. One thing that trips a lot of people up, though, is this thing called service, because you have to actually send all the documents that you filed to the other party.
Right.
And right now, with how COVID has messed up the Postal Service,
Right.
we have to do that by certified mail or sheriff. And post office, certified mail is the green card that they have you sign.
Right.
During COVID, they weren't having everybody sign because they weren't letting their carriers go up to the actual people, because they could have been sick or anything like that. So what we did to kind of help combat that, in a sense, was just start putting in with our documents to them an acceptance of service, because that's the one thing your spouse will have to sign. We have to in some way prove they got the docs.
Right.
They don't have to do anything else, but we do have to prove that they received the documents.
Oh, well, and then divorce, it makes sense. Divorce is a legal proceeding. It's a complaint. You're suing somebody. I mean, it's a formal complaint process, and the person on the other end always has to have notice.
Right.
There's different kinds of notice, constructive notice, implied. There's all kinds, but they have to hear actual notice. We need to know that they received it and they know they're aware of what's going on.
Right. It doesn't matter if they don't reply to anything else after that. They either have to have signed a green card, sheriff have to have posted it to their door, or they voluntarily signed an acceptance of service.
All right. So you filed it. Your spouse has gotten notice, and so then I take it there's a scheduled day in court after that.
Yeah. So you do have to wait the 30 days. Your spouse has 30 days with which to reply. They don't have to reply, but we have to wait that 30 days. Courts are very particular about these timelines. You do have to wait these full 30 days. And then after that 30 days is when we can file for a court date to get it moving.
Right.
Typically about 2-3 weeks out from the date you request it.
And then that's it. So you show up to your hearing. Let's assume everything else. We're not talking about property, splitting up property.
Right.
We're not talking about anything else, just the act of getting divorced from a spouse. So then you show up for your day in court. As long as everything else is handled, judge is going to give you an order?
Judge is going to sign an order. Main thing judge is looking for the file for is they want to know the date of separation, the date you signed the complaint. They're checking for that year.
Right.
They're checking for, was it day 366 or day 365?
Right.
And they're checking to make sure service is actually in there. As long as those things are in there and everything was done properly, sign off on the divorce decree, you're divorced.
Done.
Yeah,
deal.
the fact that there's no fault involved, it's really just a procedural question.
Yes.
Like you dot the I's and cross the T's right, and you're getting a divorce.
Yeah, if you take property, child custody, if you take all that stuff out of it and you just look at it as two people getting divorced from one another, it's not an overly,
Super simple.
Right.
I think it's safe to say it's
legally.
super simple. Yeah.
Legally.
But I think it's also important that we mention, this fact pattern is a super simple fact pattern. We're taking all those things out of the equation, but those things are super relevant. And, the act of absolute divorce is going to terminate a lot of rights that you would otherwise have. So again, I think we'll get into this in our next question, but those are all considerations. Like you need to be careful if you're an unrepresented party just going down filing simply for divorce, because once that's done, you're going to lose a lot of rights you would have otherwise.
And
Right.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's especially true, because the procedure in North Carolina is like once the judge signs off on that divorce decree, Once the judge's ink is on there, you cannot go back to the court and try to say, oh, now I want alimony. Oh, now I want half of the house.
That's it.
It's it.
Yeah.
It's over. That's the cutoff.
Right.
So if you didn't have those matters already pending, or you didn't have some type of separation agreement, or you didn't have something previous to that, you're done. You have no more rights to that house, that retirement account.
This is, yeah, and it's definitely, this is, we talk about some things quickly, right? We have our little segments we like to stick to, and so we try to just hit on some highlights. Obviously, we're not consulting anybody right now. We're just trying to paint a general picture of the process. And yeah, hopefully we haven't made it sound too simple, because there is a million things that could go wrong that need to be handled before a certain point. But legally speaking, that's the process. Separated for a year, file for divorce, get your spouse served, show up in court, you're divorced.
Yes.
Sounds like what you're saying, Josh, is you should consult a licensed attorney
Possibly,
prior to beginning
possibly
the
Whitaker and Hamer.
Who knows, man? Well, the name is literally on the front of our
But, this is one of those things where even just a consult, if you just schedule a consult with an attorney, you can get a lot of questions. I meet a lot of people who don't want to pay for advice, and, I get it. Don't want to have to pay an attorney, don't want to have to pay a CPA, don't want to have to pay an investment advisor. And I get that money's tight for a lot of people, but a consultation with an attorney who knows what they're doing, they can answer every question you have. You don't have to just keep going forward with these things unanswered, with these questions unanswered. You can say, hey, answer a question A, B, C, D, and they're all answered, and you gotta way forward.
I know one thing one of our colleagues says is sometimes it's better to talk to an attorney at least once to save you thousands of dollars in the long run.
Right. I mean, everything you own, care about, love is gonna be tied up in this marriage in theory, right? So anyway, and money's always tight, and but you can't. It's just a lot easier to talk to someone that knows the process, knows what's going on, and can just answer all your questions.
The Outlaw Lawyers, they've been there, they've done that, and talking to a professional as opposed to your friend at work seems like the right way to go. The Outlaw Lawyers, Josh Whitaker and Joe Hamer. Whitaker and Hamer Law Firm is where you can find them. They're the managing partners there. They're also practicing attorneys here in North Carolina. And again, our special guest is Taylor Scruggs-Smith, also an attorney with Whitaker and Hamer. And just a reminder, Whitaker and Hamer offices in Raleigh, Garner, Clayton, Goldsboro, Fuquay-Varina, and Gastonia. And if you've got a legal situation, maybe you're considering divorce, I've got a number for you. 800-659-1186. That's 800-659-1186. And again, leave your contact information, briefly what the call's about. You can also email your questions, and we can talk about those anonymously on future shows. Questions at theoutlawlawyer.com. We're back right after this.
So a lot of people ask why they should go with Whitaker and Hamer over all the other firms in the area, and I'd like to give you 3 reasons why. Reason number 1 is that we have multiple locations throughout the state in order to better help serve you, and that's ranging from Clayton and Garner all the way down to Gastonia. Reason number 2 is that we are a full-service law firm. We can handle matters from your real estate closing to your traffic ticket to your estate to your divorce and your will, and everything in between. Reason number 3 is that the combined experience of our attorneys is over 40 years, and all that experience is waiting and willing to help you. So give us a call at 919-772-7000.
Welcome back into the Outlaw Lawyers. Morgan Patrick, consumer advocate. I'm joined on set by the Outlaw Lawyers, Josh Whitaker and Joe Hamer, managing partners at Whitaker and Hamer Law Firm. Our special guest, Taylor Scruggs-Smith, also an attorney at Whitaker and Hamer. And we are getting into listener questions. And the next one up is separation agreement.
Yeah, so it's another question we get a lot. We're on our family law show, domestic law show here. And another question we always get, again, I'll combine it with a bunch of other questions, but basically, we've got a listener who is separated. I am separated. Do I need to have a separation agreement, right? So we've got someone who has made a decision to get separated from their spouse. And, well, I guess, Taylor, just tell us what a separation agreement is. We'll start basic.
So a separation agreement is essentially a contract between you and your spouse saying this is how we're going to settle everything that occurred during our marriage. This is how we're going to settle property. This is how we're going to settle kids, child support, alimony, all of it. we do get a lot of questions of people thinking they need one in order to get divorced, and you do not need one. People think you need to have one filed with the court in order to actually get divorced a year later. The court does not need an agreement as proof that you're separated. Once you guys have split up and you're in separate houses, that clock starts for the year you're separated. The date of separation sometimes is fought back and forth because of how it values property, but the court does not need a separation agreement to prove that you're divorced.
Right. So we should be. So that's a good thing to point out. There is no legal requirement if you're going to get divorced from your spouse. There you do have to be separated for a year. We talked about that, but you don't have to have a separation agreement. So it's not anything that's legally required. However,
it's a great idea.
Yeah, they could be pretty handy because they can tackle a few things that need to be tackled, or they can tackle almost everything.
Right. And the good thing about that is in a separation agreement, it is a negotiation between you and your spouse. So instead of going to court and putting it in the party of all this information in the hands of a judge who you have no control over, your attorneys have no control over, we just fight for the best outcome. But at the end of the day, that judge is making the call. So it's always going to be an uncertainty. Whereas in a separation agreement, you know, okay, I agreed to this term because she's getting this, or he agreed to this term, so I'll get this. Like, you know what the terms are and how you negotiated those terms. And sometimes it's cheaper in the long run because you're not spending a lot of time in court doing hearings about those matters.
Well, I'll give you one example that I see every day. You know, in my day-to-day life at Whitaker and Hamer, I deal with a lot of real estate transactions, and so you've got a couple who's decided to get separated. A lot of times, at least one of those folks is about to go buy a new house because they're gonna separate and they're gonna create a new household, and it's really hard to buy a new house if you don't want your spouse involved. In North Carolina, spouses have certain marital interest in real property until you're divorced. And so that presents a problem. If you're going to go buy a new house, you're going to get a mortgage. Sometimes your lender, sometimes your closing attorney will want your spouse that you've separated from to sign some paperwork or have something done. And so even a bare bones basic, we don't have to figure everything out. Separation agreement will have what we call free trader language in it.
Yes, and free trader language is very important. Free trader language essentially says that you can go out and buy property without your spouse, and they're waiving all rights they would usually have to it. Because the presumption in North Carolina is that anything bought during the marriage is marital property. And that's a pretty big presumption to overcome. So it has to be a written express waiver that they're not taking rights in your new home. In that same aspect, we get a lot of people that are selling that marital home that they used to live in, and if you want those proceeds split up in a certain way, attorneys like us need some type of written agreement saying we're splitting the proceeds 60-40, 50-50, because otherwise the rule is we split it half and half even if you agreed otherwise.
I always like that term, free trader.
Yeah, it's a cool term.
Yeah.
It is. And going back to something you said, talking about the value of that separation agreement, if you've got things that are contentious, if you've got things that you are contesting with your spouse, you're either going to amicably agree and you're going to put it into a separation agreement where you guys, like you said, each have some say, or the alternative is it's going to be a judge's order. That's
right.
It. And like you said, you can make your suggestions, you can plead your case, but at the end of the day, retaining some control over that as opposed to everything just being dictated by that order is almost 100% of the time going to be preferable. And now you might get in a situation where you have a person that you can't talk to,
right.
and it just is what it is at that point.
Right.
But if at all possible, even if you got to make some concessions, that the separation agreement route is going to give you more control over the outcome.
And I try to tell people that when it comes to separation agreements, it's not about you coming out with what you think you should have out of marriage. Neither one of these parties are going to be happy about this split and how all the money in the house and everything happens. The goal is to get you both to a place where you are at least acceptable and can live with it.
Right.
Versus being like your best, this is my dream version of how this happens.
Because it could be worse.
Right.
It could always be worse, Make
Not
some
always.
sacrifices. It could always be worse. I'm not saying it will.
I don't know if it's the attorney in me but I've always been one of those guys who's like, control what you can control. And, and a separation agreement, as long as everybody's willing, again,
Right.
if you're dealing with someone who's, irrational or not willing to even negotiate, then there's nothing you can do. But if there's anything you can agree on, like a separation agreement, you could agree on tons of stuff. You could agree on child custody.
Yes.
You could child support, post-separation support. You can split up everything. Like you could take care of your whole divorce besides the actual divorce. Mm-hmm. You can take care of all your assets, everything in a separation agreement as long as the two parties are agreeable. Now, you've got two people who are parting ways, and so it's not always agreeable. And like you said, Taylor, it's hard to find a scenario unless you just got a ton of assets where everybody's going to walk away feeling like they didn't get
screwed over.
Yeah, ripped off, or it's just the way it is. A lot of emotions running hot, even with reasonable people. But you can take care of a lot of stuff in a separation agreement. And in theory, you're getting separated. Everybody wants to kind of get on with their lives, and a separation agreement will allow you to go buy a house.
Right.
Right. We'll allow everyone to know where we stand with the kids and the schedule, and you can kind of function without a lot of this stuff being up in the air.
You're waiting a year minimum for your divorce.
Minimum.
And that separation agreement can be done day one after you separate, in theory. So it can allow a lot of the healing and that process of moving on to start.
Sometimes those separation agreements are even done prior to you actually splitting up and moving out. Like, okay, we know this is what we're about to do.
Sure.
So while we're still working with each other, we're going to go ahead and put this in here, put this as our anticipated date of separation, and fix everything now. And that's something people do too, which is perfectly fine. The only thing a court can touch after you do a separation agreement is child custody and child support, because that's always going to be in the judge's jurisdiction until the kids are 18.
And that being said, that's true, but at the same time, you can handle those matters by way of a separation agreement. And if both parties agree on that, no one can test it down the line, there's no change of circumstances, and that's going to hold up. So, the more that you can control, the better. So,
and it's a separation agreement. It's not a magical document. When we talk about a separation agreement, it's a contract between two people. It's governed by contract law.
So enforcement can be an issue.
So you would, like, a party could breach it, right? If somebody doesn't make their post-separation payment by a certain date, they've breached a contract, and that's the remedy there, right? You would sue somebody for breach.
And a lot of separation agreements will say if you sue and you win, and you had to fight for breach, you get your attorney's fees.
Yeah.
So it's worth having all of that written out. And like you said, even when it comes to the kids, you're waiting a year. The court's going to make you go to mediation anyway.
Right.
Yeah, you're separate from your spouse for a year, like you said. And if you've got kids, like, something's going to have to happen with your kids.
Right.
So it's either the court, like you said, is going to be dictating that ahead of time, or you're going to come to some agreement that, while it may not be perfect, you're at least going to have some say in it.
And even when you file in court for child custody, the court forces you to go to mediation first. The court wants you to work it out. So you might as well start.
Yeah, and again, there's a caveat. If your significant other is just one of those folks who's unreasonable, not in a good place, or there's some other things going on, it might be tough, and you might be in court, looking for a judge's assistance to kind of get things moving along. But hopefully, in our situation, we're giving our listener a pretty good situation where
we're assuming they can work together.
Yeah. But separation agreements are handy, and I really think it enables you. Again, you got a year to wait, but it enables you to kind of move on with your life. Kind of get your ducks in a row and kind of get to that next step.
The Outlaw Lawyers. What's up next?
More divorce.
More family law.
We're killing off a lot of families today.
More family law. The Outlaw Lawyers, Josh Whitaker and Joe Hamer. Whitaker and Hamer Law Firms, where you can find them. They're the managing partners there. They're also practicing attorneys here in the great state of North Carolina. Our special guest is Taylor Scruggs-Smith. Makes us look so much better since you're able to view us. If you have a legal question of your own and you need answers, I have a phone number for you, 800-659-1186. That's 800-659-1186. Just leave your contact information, briefly what the call's about. An attorney with Whitaker and Hamer will be in touch. You can always email the program, questions@theoutlawlawyer.com, and we'll get to that in a future program. More questions coming up after this.
Breaking up is hard, but your divorce doesn't have to be. Navigating the family law court system can be tricky. Let Whitaker and Hamer PLLC handle your divorce for you. Our experienced attorneys will listen to your story with compassion and understanding, and will be there to explain the family law process every step of the way. Providing you with a clear understanding of the legal process while advocating for you is our top priority, so you can spend your energy focusing on your family. Give us a call at 800-659-1186. Again, that's 800-659-1186, or visit our website at wh.lawyer to set up your consultation with our team. Again, that's www.wh.lawyer.
Welcome back into the Outlaw Lawyer. Morgan Patrick, consumer advocate, joined on set by the Outlaw Lawyers, Josh Whitaker and Joe Hamer, managing partners at Whitaker and Hamer Law Firm, practicing attorneys here in North Carolina. Special guest on set with us today, Taylor Scruggs-Smith, also an attorney at Whitaker and Hamer. We're handling listener questions. If you've got questions of your own from a legal standpoint and you need some answers, I've got a phone number for you, 800-659-1186. That's 800-659-1186. Leave your contact information, briefly what the call's about. An attorney with Whitaker and Hamer will be in touch and you guys can discuss. You can also email your questions to the program, questions@theoutlawlawyer.com. We continue.
We do. So we have a listener question show today. We've had a theme. The theme has basically been divorce. So we've been talking about kind of domestic law, family law issues that come up. Again, I will remind everybody who may be listening that we are all attorneys. Morgan's not. Everybody else besides Morgan is an attorney.
He's an honorary attorney.
Are all attorneys with the law firm of Whitaker and Hamer. We are licensed to practice in North Carolina. When we answer these listener questions, we're answering them from a perspective of someone who is domiciled in North Carolina. And so we have had a question come up where we talked about the basic legal requirements for divorce. That was our first listener question. Our second listener question today was about the necessity of a separation agreement, what a separation agreement is, what it does for you. And now we're coming to our next question that kind of builds on this. And basically, this listener is I'm getting divorced. My spouse is not going to agree to anything. What are my next steps? And so basically, the way I take this question is like, hey, there's not going to be a separation agreement. They're not going to agree to anything in the interim. We've talked about how you have to be separated for a year. They're not going to come to terms on anything. What is this client in for? Like what comes next in this situation, Taylor?
Court.
Yeah.
Court's the big thing that comes next if you guys can't agree about anything. So with court comes having a lot of financials together and ready to go, because you're going to be filling out a lot of financial worksheets about the value of property, about what your regular expenses are if you're about to fight about alimony, because we need to know what all the expenses were on the date of marriage or like the previous years,
right,
and what they were on the date of separation. So if you guys have split and the income is now completely changed because you're not a two-income household anymore, we got to know, all right, who's really actually needs money and who is just spending maybe on luxury items they shouldn't be spending on. What's the value of those retirement accounts? But all of that starts with the attorneys getting a lot of financials.
Yeah.
A lot.
But you gotta know a lot about, the household, how it worked, who had what, who inherited what from where did these funds come from for the down payment of this house, and again, what everybody's spending money on.
Right.
And at that point, I think it's important to note it's not, in that negotiation process, our fact pattern has been very amicable to this point. It's been very pleasant. But you get to this point, it gets contentious. The court get involved. It's not he said, she said at that point. Like you said, it's hard physical documentation.
Bank statements.
Exactly.
Because you're gonna.
It's a court proceeding.
Yeah, you're gonna end up filing a complaint. Either party. You're gonna end up having somebody file an answer back that's not nice, and possibly doing counterclaims on that answer.
Yeah.
Probably got two attorneys on both sides. Hearings. A consent order may be reached because everybody's like, oh my goodness, this court process, but you can't assume that. You're assuming you're going to a hearing and a judge is gonna hear all this evidence and make a finding and make an order. And
there's a lot of this is gonna be a lot of personal information that is out there kind of in a public forum, right? Because you may even get into arguing, we haven't talked about alimony and fault and no fault and that kind of thing, but you may be litigating about extramarital affairs or the way
Right.
you treat your kids, or this is going to open up a public forum to judge you on a lot of behavior that at least one of the spouses may not
Want to be
want
heard.
out there.
But hey, if it can't become to an agree, it's going to have to come out. When it comes to alimony, if there was an extramarital affair by the dependent spouse, they can't try to ask for alimony from the supporting spouse. If both parties had an affair, judge's discretion, which means we don't know.
Right.
It
Again,
depends on what you judge you
That comes
get.
back to the relevancy of fault. We talked about how fault is completely irrelevant as to the question of divorce. But when we get into these, equitable distribution, post-separation support,
Right.
fault is extremely relevant.
Extremely
There are
relevant.
several factors that are fault-based that matter a whole lot.
Yeah, equitable distribution, which is how the court splits up your property, has 16 factors that can play into an unequal distribution. Key word is that it's equitable distribution. It's not equal.
Yeah.
The court tries to make it equal, but if there's factors showing extramarital affairs, misappropriation of marital funds, you've been just spending money left and right, or you abandon the family, those things can come where the
Right.
judge is like, you know what, they deserve more of what's left over because they've had to deal with more or they got more to cover.
yeah.
When it comes to child custody, standard is the best interest of the child. So I always try to remind people it's not about whether you liked him as a husband, it's about how he is as a father.
Right.
It's not about whether you liked her as a wife, it's about how she is as a mother. So when that means who's taking the kids to school regularly, who knows their school schedule, who knows what homework they got due, who's been speaking to the teachers, the doctors, and that's a lot of information. And
Sorry, it reminded me of a stand-up bit. It's not a funny topic, but and again, like I said, I live in the real estate transactional world, the business law world, and we do a lot of risk management. We don't want things left up to a judge. We want it black and white. What happens when this happens? When this happens? When this happens? So having this type of all these very personal things that you're used to having control over, where you no longer have control over, where now a judge is gonna chime in. That I personally find that very scary.
And sometimes, though, you have to, especially if there's been any accusations of sometimes domestic violence. Those two people are never going to agree. There might even be a domestic violence protection order saying they can't even talk or see each other.
Yeah.
So sometimes there are situations where, it sucks that it's so contentious because the courtroom is not fun for
Right.
people. I mean, other than us, we're lawyers, but
Right.
everybody else is not fun for.
We're having a blast in there.
Yeah. But
Well,
I mean, sometimes
litigation's expensive too.
yeah.
Right. I mean, that's the other thing to think of. A divorce, a simple divorce may cost this. A separation agreement may cost this per hour. Litigation, we're going to trial litigation is not cheap.
And it's unpredictable.
And it's time consuming.
Exactly.
Because everybody assumes you file and you're going to be in court in a month. No, you could not be in court for 6 months to a year because there's discovery going back and forth. People have made motions about psychological evaluations. There could be several other things going on before a judge even hears the merits of the case.
Mm-hmm.
All very good reasons. If you're in this situation, we hope all of our listeners are not having to worry about this kind of thing in their life. But if you're in this situation, even if it's not us, I hope you would call Whitaker and Hamer. Even if it's not us, it is 100% worth your time to consult with an attorney that you trust, an attorney that you know is knowledgeable. Don't go consult with me, Josh, the real estate attorney, about your divorce. I'm not going to be very helpful. But you can call us and consult with Taylor, who will be very helpful to you. But it's something you don't want to underestimate the importance of.
The Outlaw Lawyers, Josh Whitaker and Joe Hamer, and our special guest, Taylor Scruggs-Smith, also an attorney at Whitaker and Hamer. We're going to take a short break, come back, and we'll wrap up this program. But if you've got a legal situation that you're facing and you've got questions, maybe this divorce issue is hitting home with you and you need some answers, here's the number, 800-659-1186. That's 800-659-1186. Leave your contact information, briefly what the call is about, and an attorney with Whitaker and Hamer will be in touch. They have offices in Raleigh, Garner, Clayton, Goldsboro, Fuquay-Varina, and Gastonia. We call them the Starbucks of the legal world. They're everywhere. So get in touch if you have a question. You can also email the show, questions@theoutlawlawyer.com. We're back right after this.
Our motto at Whitaker and Hamer is that we're your firm for life, and we say that because we can handle anything that you throw at us, from your buying a brand new house to a traffic ticket to your divorce and even to a refinance of that old home. If you need anything in terms of legal advice or legal help, give us a call at 919-772-7000, and remember, we're your firm for life.
Welcome back in to the Outlaw Lawyer. Josh Whitaker and Joe Hamer. Again, Whitaker and Hamer Law Firm, managing partners there. Our special guest is Taylor Scruggs-Smith. We have a little bit of time, so let's get right to it. How are we wrapping it up?
You know, I want to take a second. We don't have any more listener questions. We've done our 3 listener questions. We're all done. But one thing I want to get out there, and it's not necessarily legal, we see it a lot because we handle a lot of real estate transactions, right? So if you're buying a house, if you're getting a refinance, you're selling a house, that's something our firm, you need an attorney to help you, that's something our firm does a lot of. And so we kind of really plugged into the real estate market as a result, and right now it's bananas. I know we saw, there was a viral video, I know it was we used it on social media, we shared it too, but there was a viral video that kind of went nationwide.
Right.
A local real estate agent here in town that we work with took a video of everybody lining up down the street to look at a house that was on the market, a good sized house, it was 260, 250.
About 260, so in that range of what
Which is
most
like
first...
which is way different than 250 or 260 was like even 2-3 years ago.
Right. So right now, I think the average in Wake County, I think the Register of Deeds, when he updated the average sell in Wake County, was about 420. So we're in Wake County. This house is kind of under the median value right now, which changes every 30 seconds what the median value is. So this was what I would call an affordable house.
And that's a unicorn.
Yeah.
It's like a first-time home buyer market range is like under that 300,000 mark, and that video was so crazy and it went so viral so quick.
There were people lined up to look at this house, you know, and it was just down the street. I mean, it looked like the fair was in town or something. It's just this all these people were coming to look at this unicorn of a house, and so we have
any tailgating going on?
It might have been. Might have been.
And so they've updated and said that house actually went for $70K over asking price.
So at 200, we'll say it was 250 because we don't know exactly what it was, but it was in that range. So a $250,000 house, tons of people looking at it. The offer that was accepted by the sellers that closed appears to be, from the report that we saw, no inside knowledge here, $70,000 over the asking price. So this house that was put on the market for $250 sold for $320.
Which will never appraise, so it's got to be a cash deal, correct?
Well, I think the way it works is the buyer might have been ready.
Yeah, they just
put
come
extra
with,
cash.
Yeah, the appraisal doesn't necessarily.
Yeah, so if your loan requires you to put 10% down and it, only appraised for $300, then you're just stuck with an extra.
And that's a commonality in today's market, just because of the ridiculous prices that we see.
Well, I saw, and I don't know what the daily numbers are, but Wake County, we're coming to a point where we're close to being under 500 active listings on the market at a time, where normally 10 to 15,000 would be normal. We've been just ticking down, and Taylor, you went through this too, because you just went hunting for a house.
Yes, I just finally closed, thank goodness. But oh my. Like, being a buyer out there in that market right now is crazy. Sellers are asking for like $30,000 in due diligence, and that's just to have the time to inspect the property for yourself, not to say you're actually going to close on it.
And that's one of those things where we could do an in-depth deep dive on just the concept of due diligence, but that's not like something that you're likely to get back in the absence of like a very narrow set of circumstances. And there's people who are doing that, $50,000 of due diligence, sight unseen.
And
it's just because it's desperation.
And it's a lot of sight unseen offers getting accepted right now. I know when I was doing my search, a property would say that, they could start an open house on Friday. By Thursday night, they're already telling everybody the house has already been sold and they've already accepted an offer. Don't come. So it's like before you even can go look, they're already selling it.
I was just going to say, and with the growth in the area, with everybody, all these companies moving in, it's not going to change.
No, this is our new.
We're in a bubble where this is going to be kind of the normal.
And you can argue about, are we going into a recession? You can make all these national arguments on where the economy's headed and what it's doing, but on the ground here, the real estate market is just crazy. And it's going to be crazy for a long time. I don't think a recession necessarily hurt. Interest rates are going up. I don't know that necessarily changes anything because there's just no supply. We have a lot of demand
And no supply.
and very little supply.
'Cause I think even on the appraisal for the property I ended up purchasing, they had to make an adjustment for the aggregate market on the appraisal.
Yeah.
Like it's written on your appraisal, like this is what this would normally be, but because of this crazy world right
market's
now,
just insane.
this is what it
Changes,
is.
you know,
And,
every day.
and it's presenting a lot of legal questions. You know, we're talking about the real estate market in general. We're attorneys, but you know, you're talking about due diligence. You know, people are offering a lot of due diligence, sight unseen,
A lot of
waiving
seller
repairs,
leasebacks.
yeah, letting the seller stay in the. You know, there's all these things going on because I don't know that I've never seen a stronger seller market than what we're seeing now.
It's very easy. Should be very, very easy to sell a house.
Yeah, anything,
super easy.
anything you wanted to sell, you could
Yeah.
probably sell it.
Now buying on the back end, that's the problem.
Yeah,
Yeah, what do you just live in the streets with your money. You just take your money, put it in a bag. You just live on the streets, man.
But anyway, I'm glad we got to tackle a lot of listener questions today. We're gonna have to do more of these listener questions.
Yeah, a lot of fun and a big treat having Taylor Scruggs-Smith on with us today. Outlaw Lawyers, we've got another episode in the books. You can get in touch. If you have a legal question, you can call 800-659-1186. That's 800-659-1186. Leave your contact information, briefly what the call's about, and an attorney with Whitaker and Hamer will be in touch. You can also email the program questions@theoutlawlawyer.com. For Joe Hamer, Josh Whitaker, and of course our guest, Taylor Scruggs-Smith, I'm Morgan Patrick, and that's a wrap.